My daughter called me at 3:17 the morning. I know the exact time because I was already awake, sitting at my kitchen table in the dark with cold coffee and a case file I'd been staring at for 2 hours. The way I used to do back when staring at case files was still my job. Her name lit up my phone and my chest tightened the way it always does when a call comes in the middle of the night. Nothing good travels at that hour. Dead. Her voice was barely above a whisper, like she was cupping her hand over the phone, like she was afraid someone nearby could hear her. I couldn't breathe. Something in her voice wasn't right. And after 31 years of law enforcement, I've learned to trust the part of me that recognizes when something isn't right. "I'm here," I said. "I'm right here. I need you to come. Please, just come. Don't call ahead, don't tell anyone. Just get in the car." "Where are you?" "At the property. At the ridge." "Dad, I found something. I found something, and now I think they know I found it. And I'm scared. I'm really scared." I was already moving. Keys, jacket, the old service pistol I kept in the drawer by the back door. I said I was on my way. She started to say something else, and then the line went quiet, and then it went dead. The drive from my house in Asheville to the Hargrove property in the foothills of northern Georgia took just under 2 hours on a normal day. I made it in 90 minutes. My name is Robert Callahan. I'm 63 years old, and for 28 years I investigated insurance fraud for the state of North Carolina. I've seen what people do when money is involved. I've seen the paperwork they forge and the stories they construct and the lengths they will go to keep the truth buried. My daughter, Claire, married into the Hargrove family 4 years ago. I had concerns. I kept them to myself. I told myself I was being a cynical old investigator who couldn't look at any family without seeing a crime scene. Claire was happy. That was supposed to be enough. My wife, Patricia, passed away 9 years ago. Not illness, not accident. A man named Douglas Pell drove through a red light on a Tuesday afternoon going 63 miles an hour with a blood alcohol level 3 times the legal limit and hit her car on the driver's side. He walked away. She did not. Douglas Pell had the right attorney and the right connections, and a judge who had taken fishing trips with his father. He received 18 months probation and a suspended license. I spent the next 6 years in a courtroom, in appeals courts, filing complaints with the state bar, writing to anyone who would listen. The system protected Douglas Pell. I learned then what I already knew professionally but had never felt personally. Money and influence can make almost anything disappear. I swore after Patricia died that I would not let anything disappear again. Not on my watch. Not where my daughter was concerned. The Hargrove family operated a chain of senior living communities across Georgia, South Carolina, and Tennessee. 5 facilities total, all of them marketed as luxury. The brochures showed sunlit common rooms and smiling residents doing watercolor painting and gentle yoga. The tagline was dignity, comfort, and peace of mind. They charged between $8,000 and $14,000 a month per resident. The facilities had 5-star ratings on every review platform. I'd looked into them when Claire told me she was serious about Marcus. Everything appeared spotless. Too spotless, I'd thought, then told myself I was being paranoid again. The main property, the one they called Hargrove Ridge, sat on 42 acres of rolling land just outside a small town in Habersham County. Iron gate. Long gravel drive, main house that looked more like a mountain resort than a care facility. I pulled up at just after 5 in the morning and found the gate standing open. That alone set off every alarm I had. You don't leave the gate to a senior living facility open before dawn. I pulled through slowly with my headlights off. There were lights on in the administrative wing. I parked near a maintenance shed and walked to the main entrance. Knocked. Nothing. I walked around the side and tried a staff entrance. Locked. I knocked there too. Nothing. I walked the perimeter of the building until I saw a light in a first-floor window, and through the glass I could see a figure sitting in a chair with her back to me. It was Claire. There was a man standing near the door with his arms crossed. Even from outside I could tell he wasn't a resident. He was too alert, too positioned. I didn't knock on that window. I went back to the staff entrance, and this time I didn't knock. I used the edge of my jacket against the narrow window beside the door, punched through the glass, reached in, and turned the handle. The man inside the office heard me coming. He was maybe 35, thick through the shoulders, wearing a polo shirt with the facility logo. He told me I wasn't allowed back there. I walked past him. Claire came out of her chair when she heard my voice, crossed the room, and grabbed onto me the way she used to when she was 7 years old and had a nightmare. "Dad," her voice cracked. "I thought they were going to keep me here until Marcus got back." "Where's Marcus?" "Atlanta. He left this morning." "Yesterday morning." She corrected herself. She'd been awake through the night. Her hands were shaking. Her face was pale and drawn in a way that made her look younger and older at the same time. The man in the polo shirt told me he was going to call the police. I told him to go ahead and make that call. While he stepped out with his phone, I held my daughter by the shoulders and looked at her. "Tell me," I said. "Tell me everything." It came out in pieces. The way it does when someone has been holding something for hours, and the holding itself has become its own kind of weight. She'd been working the administrative side of Hargrove Ridge for 2 years. Bookkeeping, intake paperwork, coordinating with families. 3 weeks ago, she'd been reconciling financial records and found discrepancies. Payments to a law firm she didn't recognize. Transfer authorizations for 4 residents that didn't match any internal records she had access to. Power of attorney documents with signatures she found in a filing cabinet that didn't match the intake signatures for those same residents. She'd mentioned it to Marcus. He'd told her she was misreading the forms, that the legal work was handled separately at the corporate level, that she should leave it to the people whose job it was. She'd let it go for a week. Then she started looking again. She found 11 more. 11 residents in the past 3 years whose assets had been transferred through a legal instrument she'd never seen Claire in intake, signed over to a guardianship trust she couldn't trace. Residents who had significant savings or property. Residents who, in several cases, had passed away within a year of the transfer. She'd printed copies last night, planning to take them home. Someone had seen her at the printer. By the time she tried to leave, the man in the polo shirt was at the door, and Eleanor Hargrove, Marcus's mother, had arrived and told her to sit down and wait for Marcus to return. "She's not going anywhere until we sort this out," Eleanor had told her. Claire had told her she was an adult and she didn't work for Eleanor and she was going home. Eleanor had looked at her with a calm that Claire described as the most frightening thing she'd ever seen and said, "You don't understand what you've found. And you're not going to make this worse for everyone by leaving in the middle of the night with documents that don't belong to you." Claire had waited until Eleanor stepped out and called me. I looked at the folder of documents in her hands. I took them from her, leafed through them quickly. 31 years of reading financial documents will teach you to identify very quickly what you are and are not looking at. What I was looking at was not clerical error. "Let's go," I said. Eleanor Hargrove appeared in the doorway before we reached it. She was 68 years old and dressed like she'd come from a dinner party, not like someone who'd been called to a facility before dawn. Silver hair set perfectly. The posture of someone who had never once in her adult life believed she might have to justify herself to anyone. "Robert," she said. She knew my name. We'd met twice at family events. She said it the way people say a name when they want you to understand that they consider you manageable. "We're leaving," I said. "The documents Claire took are proprietary business records. Whatever she thinks she found, it's out of context. Then let your attorneys explain the context to mine." Something shifted in her expression. Not much. But I've spent decades watching the moment when someone realizes the script they prepared is not going to be sufficient. "You don't know what you're doing," she said. "I know exactly what I'm doing. I've been doing it for 30 years. I took my daughter by the arm and walked past Eleanor Hargrove into the pre-dawn dark. The man in the polo shirt was still on his phone near the entrance. I looked at him directly and he moved aside. We got into my car. I locked the doors and started the engine and watched the rearview mirror all the way down the gravel drive. My daughter cried for most of the drive, not the frightened crying she'd done when I'd arrived. Something quieter and more worn out, like she'd been holding her breath for weeks and was finally allowed to exhale. I drove and I let her cry, and I kept one hand on the wheel and one on hers. "I'm sorry," she said at one point. "I should have listened to you." "You trusted your husband," I said. "That's not something to be sorry for." My old partner, Frank Delgado, picked up on the second ring, even though it was not yet 6 in the morning. Frank had retired 2 years before I did and spent his time gardening and watching baseball and complaining about his property taxes. He also had the sharpest investigative mind of anyone I'd ever worked with. "I need everything on the Hargrove family," I told him. "Businesses, financials, legal filings, any complaints to state licensing boards, any civil suits, anything. How bad? He asked. I think it's bad. I'll start pulling, he said. At the hospital in Gainesville where I took my daughter, the attending physician asked her standard questions and drew blood at her request. She was physically unharmed, but she'd barely slept. Her blood pressure was elevated, and she wanted documentation that she'd been there and when. I'd been in this work long enough to know that documentation was not paranoia. Documentation was survival. A woman named Detective Sarah Voss arrived 2 hours after the nurse called in a welfare check referral. She was 40, careful with her words, and listened to everything I said without interrupting, which I appreciated. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she looked at the documents, and then she looked at me. Mr. Callahan, she said, I need to ask you directly. What do you think you have here? The beginning of a pattern, I said. Possibly more. We need to confirm the paperwork before we can do anything. I understand. But those residents whose assets were transferred, I need to know if they're still at that facility or if they've been moved. And I need to know their current condition. She nodded. She wasn't dismissing me. She was being careful, which was different from dismissing me. And at that moment, I needed careful. She told me to stay available. Frank called me at noon. His voice had a quality I recognized from our working years. The particular flatness that meant he'd found something, and it was worse than expected. How many locations did you say they had? He asked. 5 active, possibly a 6th under development. I'm looking at civil suits, 3 in the past 5 years, all settled, all sealed. Former employees. 2 of them filed through the same attorney in Athens, Georgia. The attorney's office also shows up on the financial records you described, Robert. The same firm. What else? Death records. I've been cross-referencing resident intake data against public death notices. It's not complete, but what I have is troubling. 18 residents in the past 4 years who passed away within 14 months of a significant financial transfer. Some of them had no family. Some of them had family who tried to contest the transfers and were told the documentation was ironclad. 18. That's what I can see from public records. There could be more. I sat with that number for a long moment. 18 families. 18 people who came to those facilities in the last years of their lives expecting dignity, comfort, and peace of mind, and instead had the remaining assets of a lifetime methodically stripped from them. Frank, I said, I need to find the people who got out. Former employees, family members who fought the system and lost, and are still angry. I need witnesses. I'll start making calls. Claire was released that afternoon. Marcus had been calling her phone repeatedly. She showed me the messages, and I told her not to respond until we understood more. She stayed at my house that night. I spent the evening on the phone and at my kitchen table again, but this time with purpose. By the following morning, Frank had found 3 former employees willing to talk. 2 had signed NDAs as part of termination agreements. The third, a woman named Donna Tate, who had worked as a charge nurse at the Hargrove facility in Greenville for 4 years, had refused to sign anything. She'd filed a complaint with the South Carolina Department of Health and Environmental Control 2 years ago. The complaint had been reviewed and dismissed within 30 days. I drove to Greenville the next morning. Donna Tate lived in a small house on a quiet street and met me at the door with the expression of someone who had been waiting for this conversation for a long time and had also given up believing it would ever happen. She was in her mid-50s, practical, precise. She sat across from me at her kitchen table and spoke for 90 minutes without notes. She described a protocol at the Greenville facility that the staff called comfort management, which was the administration's language for sedation of residents who were assessed as being behaviorally difficult. Difficult, she explained, often meant residents who asked too many questions about their finances or who requested contact with family members. The facility staff had been told to minimize. Residents on comfort management received medication adjustments that Donna had flagged repeatedly to the facility director and twice to the regional medical officer. Both times she was told the protocol was physician-approved and not within her scope to question. She told me about a man named Harold Ostrowski, 81 years old, retired civil engineer from Columbia, widower, no children. Harold had been sharp when he arrived. He'd asked to see his financial statements within the first week, and been told they were being coordinated with his estate attorney. The attorney, she'd later learned, was the same Athens firm that appeared in Frank's research. Over 6 months, Harold became progressively less coherent. His sister in Michigan called the facility repeatedly. She was told Harold was experiencing age-related cognitive decline, a natural progression, deeply sorry, unfortunately not uncommon. Harold died in his room on a February morning. His estate, which had included a paid-off house and investments valued at approximately $400,000, had been transferred 3 months earlier to a guardianship trust. His sister received a sympathy card. "I need everything you have," I told Donna. "Notes, dates, any documentation you kept." She stood up, went to a closet, and came back with a shoebox. "I kept everything," she said. "I didn't know who to give it to. I tried the state board and they closed the file in a month. I didn't trust the local police because 2 of them had relatives at that facility, and I'd seen the director talking to the county commissioner at a fundraiser. I didn't know where else to go." "I know where to go," I told her. Detective Voss had called me that morning to tell me that 3 of the 11 residents Claire had flagged were no longer at Hargrove Ridge. They had been transferred in the past 72 hours to other facilities in the Hargrove network, one as far away as Tennessee. The transfers had been processed through emergency medical relocation paperwork that moved too quickly for standard review. She also told me that when her department had reached out to the Hargrove family attorney for comment, the attorney had responded within 20 minutes, which was the kind of response time that suggested someone had been on standby. I called Voss back that evening and told her about Donna Tate, about the Athens law firm, about Frank's research on the 18 deaths. I told her I thought the scale was beyond a local investigation. She was quiet for a long moment. "You're thinking federal," she said. "Medicare and Medicaid billing," I said. "That makes it federal the moment they cross state lines with anything connected to those funds. And they're moving residents across state lines right now." "I've already put in a call," she said. "There's an agent at the FBI field office in Atlanta who's been looking at assisted living fraud in the Southeast for 2 years. I think this is going to be the call he's been waiting for." I met with Special Agent Marcus Reeves 3 days later in a conference room in Atlanta. He was 50, methodical, unhurried in the way of someone who had spent a career building cases that were meant to hold. He listened to everything. He read the documents. He looked at Frank's research. He looked at the shoebox from Donna Tate. When I finished, he leaned back and laced his fingers together. "Mr. Callahan," he said, "what you have here is significant. The question is whether we can connect intent to the top of the organization. The financial transfers can be explained away by a skilled defense attorney without testimony. The deaths are circumstantial without toxicology. What I need is evidence of a deliberate system. I need to catch them doing it." "How?" He looked at me for a moment. Then he said, "Your daughter has legitimate access to those facilities. She's still technically an employee of record. If she were to return..." I looked at him. "I'm not asking you to make that decision," he said carefully. "She's an adult and it would have to be entirely her choice. But she has access that a federal agent doesn't have. And if she's willing to go back and document what she sees, with our equipment and our teams in place around the perimeter, we could catch them in real time." I drove home and sat at my kitchen table and stared at the wall for a long time. Then Claire knocked on the kitchen door and came in and sat down across from me and looked at me with her mother's eyes. "I already know what he asked," she said. "Frank told me he was going to. Frank should not have done that. Dad." She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. "Those people, Harold Ostrowski's sister is still trying to find out what happened to her brother. There are families out there who haven't gotten answers for years. I can go back in. I still have my key card. Marcus doesn't know I know everything that I know." "She's not a law enforcement officer," I said. "She's my daughter. She's also an adult," she said, which is exactly what I said to Eleanor Hargrove when she told me to sit down. "And if I don't do this, I'm going to have to live with knowing I walked away." I sat with that for a long time. Then I called Agent Reeves and told him she'd agreed, and I told him exactly what would happen to his career and every ambition he'd ever had if anything went wrong. The operation took 11 days to set up. Claire went back to work, told Marcus she'd overreacted, that she understood she'd misread the documents, that she was sorry for causing problems. I know how hard that was for her because I know who she is. But she did it without flinching. She moved through that facility with a small camera in a badge holder and a secondary device in her jacket lining and federal agents in a surveillance van 200 yards from the property entrance. I spent those 11 days not sleeping. She documented 3 active intake files where resident financial information was being processed through the Athens firm without the knowledge of the residents' families. She recorded a meeting between the facility director and a man she recognized as a county property assessor, which included a cash envelope changing hands. She photographed medication administration logs that showed adjustments made outside physician-approved hours. And she was present when Eleanor Hargrove met with the firm's senior partner to discuss accelerating the transfer timeline for 2 residents who, in Eleanor's words, were becoming increasingly resistant. Resistant meant asking where their money was going. On the morning of the 12th day, federal agents executed simultaneous search warrants at all 5 Hargrove facilities, the Athens law firm, and the personal residence of Eleanor and Gerald Hargrove. I was parked on the road outside Hargrove Ridge when the vehicles went in. I watched the lights come on across the building. I called Claire's cell phone, and she answered on the first ring. "I'm fine," she said. "I'm with Agent Reeves. It's over, Dad." I sat in my car in the dark and let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for 11 days. The investigation ran for 14 months. Claire's documentation, combined with Donna Tate's records and the evidence Frank had assembled, and 11 former employees who came forward after the arrests were announced, gave federal prosecutors a case that the Hargrove family's attorneys could not dismantle. The Athens law firm cooperated in exchange for reduced charges, which provided the documentary evidence connecting the financial transfers directly to the Hargrove family's deliberate direction. The trial was covered by 3 national networks. I attended every day. The verdicts came down on a rainy Thursday in November. Eleanor Hargrove, 22 years for wire fraud, conspiracy, elder financial abuse, and her direct role in the deaths of 4 residents whose medical decline had been accelerated through medication manipulation. The federal prosecutor read the victims' names into the record one by one. Harold Ostrowski was the 3rd name. I heard someone in the gallery make a sound that wasn't quite a cry, and I understood without looking that Harold's sister had come from Michigan to be in that room. Gerald Hargrove, 18 years for conspiracy, wire fraud, and bribery of public officials. Marcus Hargrove, 12 years for conspiracy and financial fraud. He would be past 60 before he left a federal facility. Claire was already divorced by then. She'd filed within 2 weeks of the arrests. I hadn't asked her to. She made that decision the same way she'd made every difficult decision in this story. Clearly, without hesitation, and entirely on her own. The county property assessor, 6 years. The senior partner at the Athens firm, 9 years, disbarred for life. 3 other attorneys at the firm, sentences between 3 and 7 years. The Hargrove facilities were seized and placed under federal receivership. Every resident was evaluated independently. A victim restitution fund was established at $9 million. 26 families who had been fighting for years to understand what had happened to relatives' estates received documentation, answers, and in many cases, restitution. It didn't give them back what they'd lost. It never does. But it was something. And something is not nothing. Donna Tate was recognized formally by the federal prosecutor's office for her role in preserving evidence. She went back to nursing. Frank retired again, this time for good, he told me, and then called me 3 weeks later because he'd heard about another case. 6 months after the verdicts, Claire and I drove to Columbia, South Carolina, to meet Harold Ostrowski's sister. Her name was Grace. She was 77, sharp-eyed, and had spent 2 years writing letters to every state agency she could identify. When we sat down at her kitchen table, she held Claire's hands for a long time without saying anything, and then she said, "I knew something was wrong. I kept telling them something was wrong, and they kept telling me I was a confused old woman. Thank you for believing what I already knew. I get a letter every few weeks now. Families who watch the coverage. Former employees at other facilities. Adult children of residents who are still living in care communities and have started to notice things that don't add up. Each letter goes into a file, and each file eventually becomes a case. I'm 63 years old and my knees are worse than they were last year, and I am very tired in the way of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a long time. But I think about Harold Ostrowski. I think about the 18 families Frank's research identified and the families we never found. I think about Grace, who knew something was wrong for 2 years and had nowhere to send what she knew. And I think about Patricia. Not the accident, not the courtroom, not Douglas Pell and his fishing trip judge. I think about the morning before she died when she told me, in the way she had of saying important things simply, that she was proud of me for not looking the other way. She'd said it about a case I was working, something small, a home health aid skimming from an elderly client's account. She said, "Most people walk past. You never do." I made her a promise on the day of her funeral, not the kind you say out loud, the quiet kind, made to no one but yourself, and the empty air, and whatever is listening. I promised her that I would keep paying attention, that I would not walk past. There is a new file on my kitchen table tonight. A family in Tennessee whose father was moved to a facility in another state without their knowledge. The facility has a corporate parent I haven't finished tracing yet. I have 3 names and 2 phone numbers and a stack of documents that don't quite add up. It is late, and it is quiet, and the coffee has gone cold, the way it always does when I get absorbed in something. The way Patricia always used to remind me to drink it while it was hot. I keep forgetting even now. I pull the file closer and I start to read.